Hey, welcome to the second episode, or I guess the first ever episode of Corso Corner. I'm Bill,
I'm Dennis.
and we are here to talk today about relationship and why that matters so much with your dog. Dennis, why don't you start off? What do you have in mind when it comes to relationship?
Yeah, so one of the things, even though relationship encompasses essentially everything that we do with the dog, and that can be, you can create a really great relationship with your dog, or it's the exact opposite. One of the topics within relationship that I think we should start talking about is accountability
Mm-hmm.
and what accountability is and how it can be misinterpreted. And
Yeah.
with that misinterpretation, how it can be both a good and a bad thing, right?
Yeah, I think that it is really when you hear the word accountability, I think especially like when talking with clients or just in general about it, I think people think it's a really bad thing when it's not. Like you get held accountable for your actions all the time.
Right.
Think about the workplace. You get held accountable for your good behavior with either a pay raise, or you should, right?
Yeah.
Or a pay raise, or
A
a
bonus. Yeah.
bonus,
Yeah.
or something like that, which is saying, hey, you're doing a great job, keep it up. You're
Yeah.
holding them accountable for that. Or if you do something bad, you don't show up, or you're late, or you do something that you're not supposed to, right? You get held accountable for that bad behavior with some kind of a consequence.
Right.
Why would it not be the same for when you're dealing with your dogs?
Right. I mean, there's no reason to it for not to be. Like if your dog is, you ask your dog to do something and it's doing something super well, then obviously there's that accountability. Like we want to make sure they know that they're doing well, or vice versa. Just
Which
like
is
you were saying.
reinforcement,
Yeah,
right, for when they're
reinforcement.
doing
Right.
well.
Yeah. Or if they're doing something they're not, it's like, okay, well, what's the consequence to it? They don't just get to not listen to us or do the thing they're not supposed to be doing, and that's it. I mean, they're never going to learn really that way, and that's where like the accountability ties into relationship, is because
Yeah.
think about any relationship you've ever been in, whether that's with your boss, your partner, XYZ. Like relationship isn't just like,
It's not love.
it's not
It's
necessarily
not
always,
enough.
yeah, it's not enough. It's not
Yeah.
just love. It's like, well, you know, it's got to be a lot of other things that are involved in that, into building a healthy relationship, so to speak. And same thing applies with dogs. It's like,
Healthy. I love that. Like
yeah,
healthy
yeah, a
relationship.
healthy
Like
relation,
that's a really
not
good
just a
point.
relationship that is
That you love your dog.
toxic. Yeah, you love your
Yeah.
dog. I think,
Toxic
yeah,
loving.
yeah, yeah.
Like too much.
I think there's that toxic relationship that people generally have with their dogs,
Yes.
and we kind of touched about this in the previous um, podcast, where it's like you loving your dog. Like everyone, obviously, for the most part, loves their dog, but that's
Hmm.
not enough.
Right. Yeah. No. I love the way that you described it. Like healthy. Right.
Yeah,
And you see it in every relationship. There has to be a balanced level of it
yeah,
all. Right. And with your dog too. Like your dog. A lot of people I think they're holding their dog accountable when they really aren't. Like you can scream no, 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 no to your dog all the time, and if that's the only form of consequences that you're going to tell them no, or you might re-give a command or re-give a job that their dog's supposed to do, that's not enough, and your dog doesn't ever have an association with what the word no is supposed to mean.
right.
So like just where I think of it, the way I break it down for people is that when we're training with our dogs,
Yeah,
right? A typical marker word that a lot of people use is the word yes,
yeah,
right? Yes doesn't mean anything to your dog originally, unless you tie something very positive to that,
right.
which is usually a treat or a toy or love and affection, whatever it is. It's some kind of a reward.
Yeah,
But no is the same principle. It's just on the other side of the spectrum.
right.
It doesn't mean anything unless it's tied to something that is not pleasing to your dog. That doesn't mean that you have to, you're trying to hurt your dog or anything like that, but it's got to be something that is perceived by the dog as a consequence.
Yeah,
Otherwise, it's not going to mean anything. That word
yeah.
no has no value.
And that can honestly be something as like withholding a treat. Like obviously every dog's personality is different,
Right.
but it doesn't necessarily, again, tying back to what we talked about in the beginning too, it's like it doesn't necessarily mean a correction, or some people think that's the only way to give a dog a consequence is to harm. And it's like, no, it's like there are other ways depending on the dog, obviously, and what it
Every single
values.
dog is
Yeah,
different.
it's super different. Like but it's important that there is that distinction. There's that accountability for both good and bad things. And tying to what Bill was saying was like, okay, well, what happens when that accountability isn't there, or what could happen? Again, personalities do play a role. Is like that's where you start getting into the realm of like reactivity and whatnot.
Reactivity and anxiety
Yeah,
and aggression. It's like when we never ever identify a dog behavior as bad, and we mark it for them as bad in a way that means that we don't like it and they shouldn't do any further, in a way that they understand, that's when you start to see dogs have really bad tendencies and make
Yeah.
really, really bad decisions, like anxiety, like where they're just they've never been told what to do versus what not to do, so they just live in this ball of anxiety. They don't know what's expected of them.
Right.
Or like you'll see like reactivity, where it's like your dog's barking at other people or barking at other dogs, or a
Moving
lot of the
objects, whatever it is,
yeah,
right?
it doesn't matter whatever the trigger is. A lot of the times there is not a singular piece of identification from the person that, hey, that's actually not an acceptable behavior. As a matter of fact, they actually go the other end of it. And we were talking about this before, is that they actually will reinforce that behavior by like petting them,
Yeah.
picking your small dogs up and,
Yeah.
and cuddling them when they start barking, right?
And there's definitely, and we've seen so many instances where even though we know it's by accident, where we're like, hey, you know what? Your dog's doing something it shouldn't be doing, and you're actually reinforcing that. And they're like, oh, I never really thought of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, that's an important thing to consider because, once again, dogs don't speak English. They don't interact the way that us humans interact. So
Mm-hmm.
it's up to us to teach them the right way using such as tools and making sure there is the clear distinction between good and bad. And this again also ties into everything that this topic of conversation is about today. Relationship is because of generally a bad relationship. That's where we start looking at. Again, there are other instances where it might be different, but that's where we start looking at where a bad relationship shows reactivity, anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
That's where people start to medicate their dogs or have to put their dogs down because they're perceived as these things that they're actually not. And the reality is, even though there are, again, sometimes it's not always as simple as that, but the general population, a lot of it does come down to, well, your relationship is bad. And why is it bad? Let's start with, are you holding your dog accountable? Right?
Right. Yeah, and I think that is something that's misunderstood. It's a balance, right?
Yeah.
It's like your job as a dog owner. If you have a dog, your job is to be the one that clearly communicates to your dog what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, giving them clear, consistent boundaries,
Right.
right? So whether that is, and a boundary is just something that they're not able to do, right?
Yeah.
And make sure that they understand that that behavior is never going to be acceptable. Being consistent with it.
Yeah.
If that's jumping, for example, you never let your dog jump. If you let your dog jump sometimes, and then you get in trouble you get them in trouble the next couple of times, they'll never understand really what it is that they did wrong, because sometimes that behavior is okay, sometimes it's not okay. Our job is to clearly outline boundaries for our dogs so that we can reward them when they do well and correct them when they don't, right?
Yeah.
So that they can pick.
Oh, for sure. And one of the most basic boundaries that I like to tell clients is like a door. Like we perceive, it's about a
Thresholds.
threshold, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
when you open your car door, when you open your front door, your back, what doesn't matter. Does your dog just run out, or does it know that it has to stay there until you let it? And that is probably one of the easiest, well, one of the easiest things to teach because you don't even really have to do much. I'll stick my foot out in front of a dog if I know it's about to come running through that door and wait for them to calm down before I
Right.
let out. And it's literally as simple as
Or
that.
or if
And
you
you can,
crate train, same
yeah,
idea.
crate training.
Thresholds.
Yeah, the threshold. It's like you'd be surprised that as soon as you start doing that, how your relationship all of a sudden starts going up in an upward trajectory. That
Where your
I
dog
did
starts to
that one
listen to you
thing.
more,
Yeah,
right?
you do one thing, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, my dog's not started doing less of those bad behaviors. Why is that? Because again, this encompasses everything that we're talking about as a relationship. It's not just
Right. You don't build
relationship
a relationship with your dog in a couple of actions. It's literally everything that you
do
do. Right.
every
So like
single thing.
from when you wake up to when you go to bed, and how you wake up and how you go to bed all plays into your relationship with your dog. Like what does your feeding time look like? How does toy time look like? How does, if you have other dogs in the house, if you have multiple dogs, how do you just let them do whatever they want? Like, are they allowed to like take things from each other? Or when you are feeding them, like, do you just put the bowl down and they're jumping
Or
on you?
leave
Or
the bowl out the entire day. I think that's a
right.
big thing too. It's
Right.
just all Bill really is getting at is there's so many instances that every little thing that you do during the day has an impact on the relationship that you have with your dog.
And all those little things, like putting your dog or waiting for your dogs to jump out of the car and making them wait, doesn't make you, doesn't do anything on its own, but they add up. Those little things add up, right? And it's crazy how like those little things can really make your relationship with your dog a lot healthier, where it's like your job, there is no way around it. You are your dog's leader. You have to be,
Right.
right? We talked about this last time a little
Yeah.
bit too, but it's something I always harp on because it's like, it can't be the other way around. It doesn't make any sense because they're dogs. They don't think like that. So for us, we have to be the ones that are clearly outlining them good versus bad so that they can always make the right decision. But they have to know that it's good and bad. You can't just be the good cop. You can't just be the one that showers the dog with love and affection and expect your relationship with your dog to be one where your dog respects you and listens to you and looks to you for guidance. But it also can't be the one that you're just screaming at your dog all the time and never telling them when they're doing well. It's got to be both. You have to be both for your dog.
100%. And that's where we tend to see with our clients is when people come to us with behavioral issues with their dogs, it's like, okay, we look at, our procedures, like we want to make sure that obedience is good and whatnot, but nothing on its own really matters. It's like what we truly understand, what we generally come to the conclusion is there's something wrong with that relationship.
Yeah. If you don't have a good relationship with your dog, everything else is almost
Yeah,
impossible to
yeah,
achieve. Like if your dog doesn't respect you, right, and doesn't see you as the person that makes decisions for them, then the other stuff is even harder. Even things like obedience, getting
yeah.
strong obedience is going to be challenging if your dog just thinks of you like they can walk all over you, right? Even getting that type of stuff is hard. So like basically, I think at the end of the day, when you're talking relationship with your dog, like there has to be structure, there has to be rules and put in place that you need to do for your dog.
And
Like your
those
dog
rules
needs
that
it.
you're holding accountable for, right?
Yeah.
Both the good and the bad things.
Yep.
Like if
Telling them
I,
when they're doing
yeah,
good,
yeah,
telling them when they're doing bad. Like you
exactly.
have to.
But make it as clear as you possibly can. It has to be clear communication. Otherwise, again, that's where we see it's like, okay, well, your dog doesn't distinguish the difference between when it's supposed to jump and not supposed to jump,
Yeah.
even if you allow it to jump sometimes. That's where the problem is. You either say, hey, no jumping, and that's that, or
It's
you're,
never okay.
yeah, or it's either never okay or it's always okay. There's
Right.
never like, sometimes, because that damages the relationship, that damages communication,
Trust.
the trust, whatever you want
Mm-hmm.
to call it. And again, why this is so important is because we have to deal with, or we hear about dogs, again, who have really bad reactivity. And on top of that, there's a lot of clients of ours or from people we heard about where it's like, oh, my dog's on medication. Why?
I don't even want to. I do want to get into it, but
Yeah.
like I don't even want to get into it because I've had too many clients come to me where um, the dog is reactive, right? Or
Yeah.
the dog, and it's usually with just really
And
extreme.
perceived aggressive with that reactive.
Yeah,
Perceived.
very good point.
Very,
Yeah,
yeah.
perceived aggression where the dog is super reactive on the leash and sparking at everybody and even lunging and all that type of stuff. I've seen it on big dogs. I've seen it on small dogs. And these people, they come to me and like they've said they've been either been to other trainers in most cases as well as veterinarians who are telling them, okay, well the first solution is to let's medicate, right? And I just want to put it out there, like if you have a reactive dog, please, everybody, if you have a reactive dog, the solution is not to medicate your dog. The solution is not to muzzle your dog. These are things that people have actually been told. That's not going to solve the reactivity.
No.
If anything, you're just going to suck the soul right out of the dog. And yeah, the dog might not react anymore, but it doesn't react in a good way. It's not happy to see people. It's not having
The
a good
dog's
time.
almost
It's a
depressed.
zombie.
It's a zombie. It's like you
Yeah.
look at the dog, you're like, that dog is not behaving like an animal. It's behaving like, I don't even know what I would
Nothing,
even
like
consider.
a zombie.
Yeah.
Like it's like dead. It's dead but alive, right? And the thing is, like to all the vets out there who are dealing with reactive dogs, who see reactive dogs, you tell them to put them on trazodone or anything else just to zap out all reactivity is like that. You're not doing anybody any good here.
You're putting a band-aid on the, let's put it like this. You're
Yeah.
putting a band-aid on this.
Yeah, because he's not, or like muzzling. Like if your dog's lunging and barking, it's like
Yeah.
literally closing the dog's mouth to bark.
Even they have those, they
It's
advertise
crazy.
those like no bark collars. You know
Oh
what I-
yeah,
oh,
oh
like,
yeah.
those same. We're not just. Those aren't the only two things that happen out there. There's so many.
I've seen so many wild things
that,
like,
and they're like, oh, this is gonna help my dog stop barking. Just like we've talked about before, and what we will continue talking about. There is no, like, putting a band-aid is never gonna solve anything, and a lot of it does. Again, why we're talking about this, a lot of this comes down to just relationship and everything that encompasses that relationship.
right. So there's a couple of things. So
Yeah.
like when we're talking about reactivity, maybe it will help to define it. So like Reactivity, what it comes down to, it's right, is whenever a new stimulus enters the dog's environment, right, they have an overly inflated response to that stimulus, right, or that trigger.
Yeah, such as barking or lunging, whatnot.
Barking, lunging, whining, crying, pulling, any of those type of behaviors is when something new enters your dog's environment, they feel these really big feelings, whether it's, there's so many different reasons why,
Yeah, but
whether
it's
they're
both good or
afraid,
bad.
whether they're overstimulated, whether they're overly excited, it doesn't matter. They have these overly developed feelings and they don't know what to do with them. So they react
Reactivity.
in
Yep.
a way that lets them get out some of that energy. So the only way that you solve reactivity is to change the way that your dog perceives their triggers, whether it's people, whether it's dogs, whether it's cars or squirrels or
Or
whatever
even
it is.
whatever environment
It
that it may
doesn't
be.
matter. Whatever their trigger is, you need to help them change the way that they think about this. What I've learned is that there are like 99% of trainers don't actually know how to solve that. They think that you either have some that are giving people like us balance trainers a bad name, where it's, pop them
Correct,
until they
correct,
do it.
correct, correct.
Correct.
Till your arm falls off, which is
And
not the case.
it's not the case, right? And there are some dogs where you can give a very firm leave it or a slight pop and it does stop that
Right.
reactivity, right? Your dog decides, okay, that's a bad decision. How can I react in a good way and get a good decision,
But
like make a good
generally,
decision?
it's a little bit more
It's
complicated
more
than that.
layered
Yeah,
than that,
it's a lot more
far
layered.
more
Yeah.
layered than that, and like, and again, back to that, there is no quick fix. There's no quick fix to most dogs. When you have severely reactive dogs, there is no quick fix. And that goes back to like the accountability. It's like I've had people ask me like, how can I quickly fix my dog? You can't.
Can't.
How can I quickly stop my dog from being aggressive with the other dogs in the house? You can't, because like they didn't develop that overnight. They don't get rid of it overnight. Like this is things that have been boiling and boiling and boiling, and now they've reached its head, and now you've got a problem that you can visibly see. But that didn't just happen. That's been the case. It's kind of been brewing for a
Yeah,
while.
that's exactly the same when you talk about relationships between humans. Is like, how do I quickly
Yes,
fix my relationship?
you don't.
Well, you don't.
You don't.
It's not just like, oh, you do this one thing and it change. No, exactly the same thing applies to dog. You cannot. There is no quick fix for a relationship. It takes time. It takes commitment, accountability. It takes
Mm-hmm.
all these different things,
Right.
and who knows how long it'll take. For some dogs, it's pretty quick. Like Bill
Again,
was saying,
all dogs
sometimes
are different.
all dogs are different.
Like it definitely depends on that. It's like and like I've been able to work in multiple different industries, whether it's the dog training industry whether it was before I was an elementary school teacher, like I've seen it in this industry too. And anything else, the restaurant, it doesn't matter what industry that like I've worked in. It's just a general problem that we have in society is that there is no accountability. There's no self accountability. Like how everybody, I was talking with one of my friends the other day, and I was saying this one thing where it's like everybody wants all these nice things, right? In society, we have this problem. Everybody wants all the stuff. They want to do none of the work with it, right? So like they want to be, they want to have the really well trained dog. Don't want to do any training. Okay, they want to be in really good physical shape, but don't want to work out or don't want to watch what they eat, right? They want to make all the money, but they don't want to do any of the work. So it's like, when did that start to change in our
Yeah.
society? When did it start to become this like instant gratification or nothing? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, and that's again what we're going back to is just like,
Go ahead, Aaron.
yeah, that all these things is it takes time, right? And we don't say like we're not when we're talking about reactivity and medication, like we're not saying that to like make you feel bad that if your dog's reactive that like you suck. Not at all, because
No,
it's not
it's not
that's
easy.
it's not easy. And Bill knows better than me because he's lived with the reactive dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how long it takes.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you straight up from
Yeah.
when I adopted Booker from the shelter. Booker was he's my Cane Corso. He was 2 years old when I adopted him, and he came into my house. And when we quickly figured out, we started taking him for walks. He was super reactive, right? So I've tried every method under the sun. I tried to correct it, didn't work. This is before I was a trainer, but I tried to do that, didn't work. When I tried to, just give him treats, didn't work either. So it's like, okay, I had to start looking introspective, like what's going on here? How do I solve this? And I realized it was my relationship with him, right? And that means like, okay, how do I invest into that? How do I make my relationship better with him? And I'll tell you right now, I've spent hundreds of hours working on it. Like in training, I've spent all the time in restructuring how we live together. And that's where, like, now that he's no longer that way anymore, he's no longer reactive, and that's been the result of hundreds upon hundreds of hours of work. And like, it's not easy. And like, when any trainers are telling you, if you've got a super reactive dog, it's not easy. It comes down to like accountability. Like, you have to hold your dog accountable, but you have to also hold yourself accountable. You've got to put in the work.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely accountability is one of those things that it's really hard for people nowadays, and I don't necessarily understand why. It's no one's saying that you're not a good dog owner. Nobody's saying that you're not a good person or anything like
No, no,
that.
not again. None of this is to bash anyone. It's just like we're talking from our own experience and from working with clients as well. As like,
Mm-hmm.
this is what we see. This is like the whole encompassing thing of the problems that we see, and a lot of these problems can be, especially when we're talking about dog training, can be solved through like that relationship accountability aspect. The dog trusts you. The dog views you as a leader. Those are all things that, again, they all build into what we qualify as our relationship with our dog.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it goes, and it can go so deep.
I mean, there's anything, any dog training topic that you can talk about, any issues that your dog has or does, whether that's good or bad, is all literally, like I said, all encompassing that relationship that you are over time just progressively trying to build. And again, it never really stops.
Mm-hmm.
And we have these quick fixes that people try to do, and they obviously don't work. Like, just to go back to the whole medication reactivity thing, is like, seeing a dog medicated, everyone can have their own opinion on it, but it's very sad. And I know there's people who don't do that on purpose, who don't know better. And I
And let
get
us be the
that.
one to tell you then. Like,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
if nobody else will tell you, like, if you've got a reactive dog, the solution is not to medicate them. That's not going to do anything. You're just going to zap them of their soul. You're going to take everything out. Yeah, they won't react anymore, but they won't do anything anymore.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, if you take away that medication, they are still the same thing. They're still the same. They still feel the same way towards their trigger.
Yeah.
And nothing has actually changed. You just
Yeah.
mask the problem, right? And it's honestly, you can, I mean, I don't. Maybe we shouldn't go here, but I will go here.
Yeah.
Do the same thing in people,
Yeah.
right? People want the quick fix, right? They medicate right as soon as they have an issue, right? So instead, there's multiple examples that we can give,
Yeah.
but like, anytime they feel a certain type of way, you just pop a pill, and like, you have instant gratification, maybe, but at the end of the day, you're not solving anything, and you're becoming very dependent upon that to alter the way you feel, which is the same thing that you're doing with your dog.
Yeah. So now that we've kind of talked about that, what do you think are some ways that, if people are having these issues where there's a severe case of reactivity and all these sort of bad behaviors, what are some ways that people should go about it? Like, I know vets generally the first people that, or person that people will go to, because it's like, okay, the dog knows the health of my dog, this and that, blah
Yeah.
blah blah. But what are some suggestions if someone came up to you from a very general perspective?
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
yeah.
it's each case is different, but
Right.
from a very generalized perspective, what are some tips or advice, I guess, that you would give to those people?
For dogs that, or for people
Yeah,
who have a reactive dog.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So like, yeah, number one is like, the first consultation that you should be with is not a veterinarian, right? It should be with a qualified dog trainer,
yeah,
somebody that actually knows what they're talking about. And like, when you're talking about that, what I would say is there's a lot of things that really can build this in. So like,
yeah,
number one that I see most often is your handling of your dog, like on the leash, right? So many people don't actually teach their dog how to walk nicely on a leash. That is first and foremost, right? Is that if your dog
100%.
knows how to walk nicely on a leash, then and there are cases where
Right.
dogs will be walking nice on the leash, and then they're reactive towards the other thing, for sure. But so many times I see people's own individual handling be a very big contributing factor to their dog's reactivity.
Yeah.
That's number
100%.
one.
Yeah, and that's what we preach, and that's like one of the first things we do. We always want to make sure, even if the issue that someone comes with us isn't has nothing to do with what the dog walks fine outside, we still look at that because, like, okay, let's just see
You
how
know,
it's.
you know what's funny though about this? It makes me even connect the dot to myself here. Is that it's really hard. I have no problem telling people this,
Yeah.
but again, with respect, but
Yeah.
like, I have no problem telling you like, hey, it is you. And the best thing about when I've worked with all of my clients is usually there's usually a light bulb that goes off for them around like session 3 or session 4. Once I've fixed kind of the things that they have wrong with their dog, or
Yeah.
they perceive to be wrong with their dog, even session 2, 3, they're like, oh, so it was me. And I'm like, yeah, it is. Like, and like, wouldn't it be better? Like, and I tell this to people all the time. Wouldn't you rather me tell you that it is you? Because what if
Instead
I
of
told
yeah.
you, no, like your dog sucks, like your dog cannot be fixed? Then what's your option?
Yeah.
You can work on you, right? If I told you, hey, your handling needs to get better,
That's
so then
something you can practice in.
so
Yeah.
so you could say, okay, Bill, how can I get better at it? What are some tips? What are some tricks? What are some drills that I can do that can help me improve as a handler? But here we are talking about, what does that take? Accountability. It's my fault. I am the problem here. Well, it's like, yeah, a lot of the times it is the case, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like, we're not setting up our dog for success, right? So yeah, that would be first and foremost to me, is like, take a look at your handling. Or if you don't know what a good handler looks like, you can ask me. You can ask any dog trainer that you trust, and they can actually help you with that. That would be the first place that I'd start there. That'd be number one, would be
Yeah.
handling.
Yeah. And then going off of that too, I think what we do as well is basic obedience. And again, it's I see a
Yeah,
lot of comments on like social media, like, oh, just my dog knows basic obedience, blah, 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 this and that. It's like, look, we're not teaching basic obedience because of, the fact that it's going to solve the problem. It's obedience on itself is never going to solve anything. But
there is no
yeah,
X
yeah,
button to
yeah, there's
press
no
when you
point.
have a reactive dog. It's all of this stuff.
Yeah, it's all of this stuff. But it's a tool
Yeah,
that we can use with our dog especially when we're dealing with behavioral issues. It's
right,
something that's, like you always say, it's in our toolkit that we can pull out
right,
when our dog's reactive, as an example,
right.
and you start doing sit down while there's a bunch of other dogs around and the dog's paying attention to you. It's a tool that we can use
Yeah.
to take that distraction like away from the dog and focus it on you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And I tell this to people all the time. Obedience is the foundation for which we communicate with our dogs.
Yeah.
If you cannot get your dog, right? Your relationship with your dog should be, I give you tasks, you do my tasks, you get reward. You don't do it, you get correction, right? You have to do the thing that I asked you to do. If you can't get your dog to sit or to down or to place or whatever the command is, then that's where we would start, right? Where it's like, that's fundamental problem number one. Because if your dog cannot do that for you when you guys are by yourself, or if you ask yourself, like, does my dog always listen to me when he's on the leash? Okay, if he doesn't, then he's never going to listen to you off the leash. But then at the same time, he's also never going to listen to you on the leash when there are tons of distractions. You have to start at the ground up. You have to make sure that you have that solid obedience. And obedience to me, I asked my dog one time, and he knows that there's going to be accountability at it. He's going to get reward if he doesn't. He's just going to get correction if he doesn't do it. So you have to have that solid obedience. That's where we start with that.
Yeah, and I would almost say that the basic obedience, in a way, is more for the humans or the handler than it is for the dog. Why? Because it teaches the humans how to communicate with your dog.
Yes, it's relationship.
It's really, yeah, and again, relationship, right?
Like,
but
see
it's
these
not even
factors that
it's
keep coming back here.
anyone can teach a dog, right? Theoretically, right? It's
Right.
sitting down, or one of the reason it's basic obedience is one of the foundational things and super
Right.
simple. But it's
Right.
really like someone coming up to us who has zero experience with a dog. It's like, we're actually trying to teach you how to communicate with the dog.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
agreed. We're helping you build the relationship between you and your dog using those tools. Obedience is a tool. Leashes and collars and all these different things are still tools. They don't have to be physical things.
Treats, all of them, they're all just tools that we have in our tool belt. And like,
Yeah.
with reactivity, you need to have a pretty diverse tool belt, especially if you're a trainer. Like, there is no one all fix for reactivity. Like, again, like, where teaching obedience is so different. Where you're teaching behavioral stuff, there is no quick fix. There is no, oh, when my dog reacts, do this, or when my dog is aggressive, do this, or when my dog is anxious, do this. There is no quick fix for so many of these dogs, because it's a way deep rooted thing, right?
Yeah.
And where it's like, again, it's not where it hasn't been happening. It just happens. My dog just started reacting. It's like, you've probably missed a bunch. Not probably, you actually have missed a lot of the warning signs along the way.
There's like maybe 1% of dogs who are out there that all of a sudden just started doing things randomly.
Right.
Maybe, and that's a big maybe.
Right.
Majority of the time, it's just that handler or that person did not understand those signs that the dog was communicating, and it again boiled up to the point where all of a sudden the dog starts doing those bad behaviors.
responds to the way that
Yeah,
they're feeling with that reactivity
yeah.
that we can visually see. That's hard to miss,
And
right? The
because
barking,
we
jumping,
didn't
lunging.
teach that dog how to
Right.
respond the right way, they respond the way they think is right, which unfortunately
It's
doesn't
just
go in
letting
their
out that
favor. Yeah,
emotion. It's just
yeah,
letting out that emotion. It's
yeah,
like with us. Like if every time that I got mad or I got upset, I yelled out and I yelled and I screamed, which made me feel really good because it helps relieve that thing. I would be looked at as a maniac,
yeah.
right?
But
Because
if
that's not how we are supposed to handle our emotions,
yes,
right? So like teaching your dog that same ability is, or if every time that like I was happy, like I started clapping,
yeah,
like that would be really weird, right? So like even when your dogs are clapping or like yelling or barking or wagging their tail aggressively, right? Or they're doing all that. That's, again, you're not helping your dog regulate their emotions. So it's like and it's your job to do that. Like they're just dogs. They don't know. They just see and they respond. That's what they do. But it's our job to be like, okay, this is how you are supposed to respond. This is okay. This is not okay. It's your job as their owner to set them up for success in that way.
yeah, yeah. Remember that we are here to teach dogs how to be integrated into our society. That's why our rules
Right.
apply.
Yeah, that's a great
That's why
point.
we're looked at as the leaders. It's just like with honestly, like with kids, is like we're your job generally as parents is to raise your kids to understand how to interact and live in the society that we live in. But for kids, it's easier because to an extent they talk the language, they do all these. Dogs have none of that.
Right. You
If
got to learn how to speak dog.
yeah, exactly. We're trying to teach them, hey, even though that's how you are ingrained to react and behave,
Mm-hmm.
this is how you shouldn't be doing it, and this is how you should be doing it.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think that's a great point. It's like you're talking about handling, you're talking about obedience, and then you're talking about relationship. Those are like my big three with like reactivity cases. Is that like somewhere along the line, one of those three got um, wishy-washy, right? Where
Right.
it's like one of those lines blurred for them. So it's like if your dog has really good obedience, and again, this is possible. Like if your dog has really good obedience, and like I mean, their dog listens to you all the time, right? And you also have a really strong relationship with your dog, and you have was the last one I was saying was handling, and you're a
Handling
pretty
it.
good handler, right? If you have those three things, your dog still might feel a certain type of way about certain triggers, and like that's fine. Then we'll evaluate that at that point. And there are things that we can still do at that point. If you can honestly cross off those other three boxes and you still have a reactive dog, like that's possible, but most people
It's
don't.
yeah,
Most
most
people
people
don't.
don't.
Most
Yeah,
people's
it's
issues lie within one of those three
especially
things.
with everyone we worked with, it's usually one of those three, if not
Mm-hmm.
all three. And then as soon as all those get better and that foundation is strong, everything just the reactivity just dials down. Just like oh, it's like it's so much better. They might react to certain stimulus sometimes, but it just changes. I mean, we literally last week we were talking about some of our clients like oh like they're walking so much better on the leash, they're so much less reactive, they're not making as much noise when a dog or a person or a car or whatever sound walks by,
Right,
right?
right. And I think that that's just like an important thing to keep in mind is that there is a solution, but I can't promise you that it's going to be fit quick.
Yeah,
It's like it'll be a fundamental thing, and I think something you say a lot too, which I think people just don't keep in mind, is that like these at the end of the day they're animals. We
yeah.
have to treat them as such, right? I think people get into like they get into like they get a dog because like it's
It's a
especially with
thing to
small
do.
dogs. Yeah,
It's a thing to do.
it is a thing to do now, but it's like they don't do the research in the breed. They
They don't do the research and the training. Like
the
there's so
training
much
that's needed to
there's so much information out there. Like a lot of from what I've learned
yeah.
outside of physically working with dogs has been the information online.
Right. And
There's
it's all and there's no excuse in today's world.
no,
All the information, as long as you're picking and sourcing properly, like it's all available to everybody.
it's readily available. Like you can learn so much just by Google search, YouTube, and just watching a bunch of different trainers.
Yeah, and you know what? Going back to what we were saying, like
Yeah.
I think that there will be a fourth pillar that I put into reactivity as to why a lot of people's dogs are reactive, and it's the understimulation of their dog,
Oh,
right?
that's a bit. That's actually a really big one.
Both
Yeah.
mental and physical,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like if you expect your dog to just lounge around the house all day,
And there is
and
that expectation.
yeah, and a lot of people have that expectation. They don't train with their dogs. They don't exercise their dogs, and literally going on one or two walks per day is not nearly enough for like most
Breed
breeds.
dependent, but
Yeah,
especially
and
the bigger
age
breeds.
dependent,
Age, yeah, like
especially.
there are, again, we're talking about the general sort of problems and concerns that people
Yeah,
come up with, but that's a huge thing. I mean, I live in an apartment complex, and I just from what I see, it's so many people live
Yeah.
there, have dogs, and I mean, I'm
They
I'm
just expect
outside.
them to
Maybe
be
a
couch
few people,
potatoes, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, maybe a few people walk their dogs enough, and even then, it's like
And like
there
just walking your dog
is
is
not.
is
I
like a
don't.
warm up for most
Yeah,
dogs.
I
Like
don't think
and
it's enough.
you know what, one of the most reactive breeds, and every dog trainer will agree with this, one of the most reactive breeds we see is German Shepherds. People get German Shepherds because they're beautiful, and then they don't work them, they don't train them, they don't, especially if they got a working line one. If they have a working line Shepherd, then
That's
it's
even
like it's
worse.
even worse,
Any
right?
working line breed, really,
Right,
but
right. Like most people, and like again in America here today, like most people like are lazy. They don't really work out themselves. They are obviously not going to work out their dog, but they get the German Shepherd anyway because it's beautiful and they want somebody to protect their house and yada yada. But then the dog is destructive. The dog has no rules. The dog is extremely reactive. It's like the trademarked dog I think for reactivities. Like you see that Shepherd lunging,
yeah,
and that's like what you see. It's like well, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of their problems are stemming from they don't stimulate their dog enough.
yeah, and
That's
that's
a
it.
dog that wants to work. That dog wants a job. That dog wants to be exercised. And most people don't check those boxes.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden their dog's super reactive. I can't figure out why. Well, I can.
I mean, yeah, like Will Atherton says, a tired dog is a good dog, and
Yeah.
obviously the generalization of that is if you stimulate your dog both physically and mentally, a lot of those issues that you have, especially in the household, I would say, because everyone's
Yes.
always like, "Oh, my dog chewed this, my dog chewed that."
Mm-hmm.
It people came over and it was going crazy, whatever it may be, and it's like, okay, well, step one, try to tire your dog out before you're heading out
Try
to
to
work.
properly
Yeah,
exercise them.
exercise them, and
Like,
it annoys me when people are like, "Oh, like I don't want my dog to be this like super obedient." It's like we're not. That's not what we're saying. But
but why wouldn't you want that?
yeah,
Like
why wouldn't
I
you? It's like even even
fine,
going basic.
I'll
Yeah,
give them
let's
that.
say
I'll
you
give them that. I'll give them that.
let's say you don't want to spend that much, but it's like you still have to, just like humans, we need to be stimulated. Same thing
Right.
with dogs. The difference is when dogs aren't stimulated, they have the ability to break shit around the house.
Right. They go and find their own
Yeah,
stimulants. Like they go find their own stimulation, which is usually your coffee table or your rug or your something in your house that was not supposed to be a toy,
hmm
and all of a sudden it's a toy and it's no good, and that's what happens. So that's definitely a fourth pillar for me is
yeah.
that
I
like
that's a good
the
one because I
understimulation,
the
man, of dogs.
understimulation is it's a huge thing
So
that
if you want, like, okay, maybe you do want a dog to just be, your lounge buddy. That's totally possible. Do the research, find what breeds are good for that, and make sure that you're getting a dog that doesn't need a lot of exercise. And then also, you don't have to get a puppy. Like, don't do
no
that to the puppy. You're doing a disservice to that dog. Get a dog that's a little
a
bit
little bit
older.
older.
Get
Yeah,
a senior dog. Go to a shelter. Get a senior dog. Like, live. That's fine. No one's saying you have to have dedicate all that time to exercise your dog mentally and physically, but then make sure that you're getting the right breed for your lifestyle.
and
Don't just get that dog because it's beautiful.
yeah, and there's also a lot of toys that
That
you
goes back
can.
to accountability,
Yeah,
right?
it really does.
Accountability of pick the right breed for
Yeah,
you. Like that's your job. It's your dog.
yeah, no, for sure. It's this all comes down to everything where the topic of conversation with relationship and just to before we go get back to that, it's like there's toys out there that when I know that it's raining, as an example, right? People are like, oh, what if it's like too cold out or it's raining? Well, like, hey, that's something you should consider and dress for. Like, especially if you live in the Midwest, it's like that's expected that there's going to be times when it's super cold. But even outside of that, there's again with the information out there, there's so many toys you can buy that like the dog like sniff mats.
Right.
That's a
Great
very basic
stimulus.
thing. You don't even have to buy anything for that. You could put a bunch of kibble
Right.
or whatnot in
Right.
a paper in a towel, roll it up x amount of times, and have your dog go at that. Or
Right.
chewing on bones and whatever it is, right?
Right.
So
Or at least introducing those to your dog and showing them how to use
yeah,
them properly, right? Because there's like, I've seen too many people say, my dog doesn't like toys. My dog doesn't like bones. Like, okay, sometimes it's a little bit more complicated than just throwing them on the floor and just expecting your dog to know what to do with
yeah,
them. Like, show them how to interact with those things. Like,
yeah.
it's just a long thing. And you can see every way that we turn this, it still always comes back
Down to
to accountability
and to really to us.
to you. Like you are your dog's person, your dog's leader. Like you're the one that's going to either set them up for success or failure depending on what you do. So it's like just be responsible, think about what you want, think about the type of lifestyle you live and what's going to be a good fit for that, and then get that accordingly. And if you come across a problem along the way, like that's why there are trainers here for you. Like that's why there are like resources available,
information online, whatever it may
where
be.
it's accessible and do what it takes to do right by your dog.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's not that simple. It does take some time sometimes, like where it's not easy. But at the end of the day, like your dog it should be your dog. You love them. You say you love them. Like love is more than just cuddles and affection. It's putting in the work when they need to be brought up from some behavioral conditions as well.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think that's a good way to kind of end today's podcast on
Yeah.
more of like a positive-ish note,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into
There's
this.
there is, and we definitely, I think we did our best in terms of
Yeah, and if you have any questions
right.
along the way too, like we're both here and we would love to talk. I mean, I think if nothing else, you can see we're passionate about what we're talking about here. We're happy to help people, and that's why you get into the dog training business is to help people with their dogs, and you know, I find joy in being able to do that and break things down for people that they don't understand. So we're always here to help in that situation, and the relationship is a lot, but it doesn't have to be. Right. And if you need help with kind of forming a new relationship with your dog, more than welcome to reach out to one of us, and we can show you how to go from there.
Yeah, and if there's any topics that you want us to talk about moving forward,
yeah, let us know.
Let us know. Yeah,
we're always looking for suggestions. We want to be able to help with however we can.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Well, we'll see you guys later. Thanks for joining us in the second episode of Corso Corner. We'll see you guys next time.